Welcome to the Leadership School podcast. I'm your host, leadership and self-care coach, Kyla Cofer. Here at the Leadership School, you'll hear leaders from around the world sharing their stories and expertise on how to lead with balance and integrity. Our goal? Teach you how to be an extraordinary leader. Welcome back to Leadership School. I'm your host, Kyla Cofer, and I'm here with very special guest, Doug Noll. Doug is an author, professor, attorney, and trainer. He has created a method to train people on emotional intelligence. He calls it listening people into existence. It is an incredible skill that is a must-have for every single person. If you want to develop emotional intelligence in yourself and in the people that you're leading, you have got to listen carefully. He's including some incredible resources, especially for listeners of Leadership School. So listen carefully for that. With that, let's just get started. Doug, it is really a pleasure to have you at the Leadership School. I have been looking forward to this interview for weeks, and I'm really excited about it. So we're going to not waste any time, and I'm going to have you just go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, Kyla, thanks for having me on the show. My history goes kind of like this. I was born with a lot of disabilities. I was born deaf, partially blind, 2 club feet, left-handed, bad teeth, couldn't walk until I was 3 years old after 3 or 4 surgeries. Although I grew up in affluence in Southern California, I had a rough childhood, and that emotional baggage carried with me for a long time. But I was blessed with a good mind, and I ended up going to Dartmouth College, studying English literature. And in those days, if you didn't go to med school, you went to law school. So that's what I did. I came back to California, went to law school, did well in law school, came down to Central California and clerked for an appellate judge for a year, and then went into private practice where I was groomed to become a big-time commercial and business trial lawyer. And in fact, I tried my first jury trial 2 months after joining the firm. And my second, my second trial was the defense of a $36 million securities fraud case in the Southern District of California in San Diego for 7 months.
That's a big case.
Yeah, that's a big case. That's how my career started. And for the next 22 years, that's what I did. Well, I was good at it, and I could take very complex problems and break them down and make them explainable to juries and judges. And so I was pretty good at what I did. However, it was feeding the wrong side of me because of all of my emotional baggage, and I was inside pretty immature and had a lot of arrogance and aloofness. And, in the law, you can get away with that kind of attitude, but it's a miserable way to live.
I just have to say, everything you've said so far is such a surprise to me because I did not know any of this about you before we started. I had seen this whole different side. So this is really interesting. That's where you started. Right. But when you're saying that you were arrogant, I'm kind of actually very shocked to hear that because I never would have put that word with you ever.
I know. Thank you. It's taken some work. And it was not an overnight transition. The way I started transitioning was in the mid 80s. I took up the martial arts, and I was awarded my second degree black belt when I was 40 years old in 1990. And then my teacher said, "You're done here. Go learn Tai Chi." And so I started studying Tai Chi. And Tai Chi has 2 really interesting paradoxes. The one is the softer you are, the stronger you are. And the second paradox is the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. Didn't compute too well for me at that time. But I continued to study it until eventually in the late 90s, 97, I think, I was trying a case and cross-examining somebody, and the thought came to me, what the heck am I doing in here? And after that trial, I had a vacation planned with a bunch of friends to run a whitewater river, the main salmon up in Idaho. And so I spent 10 days on my raft just thinking about how many people I'd served, and concluded that I really hadn't served that many people as a trial lawyer. And I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. But I didn't know what I was going to do. Well, as it turns out, the universe provides. I came back to town and was driving down out of the mountains to my office. And I heard that Monday after the vacation, I heard a public service announcement for a new master's degree program in peacemaking and conflict studies being offered at Fresno Pacific University, our local Mennonite university. And I got interested and ultimately enrolled. And so for the next 3 years, I was a full-time graduate student again, a 3/4 time law professor at our local law school and chair of the board of trustees, and a full-time trial lawyer.
How old were you at this point?
I was 48 years old.
So at 48, you decided to it's almost a whole new career.
That's
You
right.
went and got another degree and just completely shifted.
That's right. And that education completely changed my life.
I think what's really interesting too is, we at like 17 or 18, we always think that like whatever we choose, this is it for us. This is our life. And I have to make this decision. It becomes this really major, big decision weigh on us. But what I'm hearing is it doesn't have to be like
it doesn't.
We can, and it wasn't for me either.
Right.
We change our minds. We try things.
Well, if you're smart, you pay attention to what's going on inside you and you follow where your heart and your mind are taking you. And so I became a peacemaker. I actually gave notice. I gave 1 week's notice in October of 2000 to my partners. And I walked out. I left $10 million on the table and just walked away and opened my peacemaking and mediation practice on November 1st. And that would have all been fine. And I did, as it turns out, it was not a great business decision because I never make as much money now as I did when I was a lawyer. But it was a great personal decision because I served more people in a week than I served in 22 years as a trial lawyer. But what really changed things was in 2005 when I was in a very difficult, contentious mediation where if there were knives on the table, there would have been blood on the floor.
Can we explain real quick what a mediation is? We've explained it in a couple of episodes, but yeah.
Yeah, a mediation is a process. Consider it a facilitated negotiation. And in litigated disputes, where there's a lawsuit involved, people will hire a mediator, somebody like me, who will then help them settle the lawsuit without having to go to trial. And in fact, 98% of all cases settled before trial, most of them in mediation. And it's much, much cheaper. I mean, just to give you an example, if you wanted to get a divorce in Los Angeles, it'd cost you $150,000 in legal fees. You can mediate it for less than $10,000 and get a better result.
Yeah.
So that's mediation, particular case. The people that were in front of me were a divorce couple that were fighting over an $18,000 problem, and they'd each spent $50,000 in attorney's fees.
Wow.
Classic case of where they just hated each other's guts, and they were screaming vile obscenities at each other. And I didn't really know what to do. And finally, the thought came to me, listen to the emotion. So that's what I had them do. And at the end, the ex-husband, John, put his face in his hands and started sobbing. And he looked across the table and said, that's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years. And they settled the case in 5 minutes without my help after that and walked out holding hands to have lunch with each other. My jaw dropped.
Wow. If you're not watching the video of this, our faces are kind of like our eyes are all bugged. We're like, wow, this is amazing.
It was amazing.
So what question did you heard in your mind, listen to the emotions?
Right.
Well, what questions did you bring? Like, I don't know if you can remember those, but like, how did you change what you were doing in that mediation externally?
Normally what I would do is in these situations, these parties were unrepresented by counsel. So I use different processes for different situations. But when parties are unrepresented, and there's this kind of animosity, and it's the animosity that's driving the lawsuit, not the legal claims at all. Mm-hmm. I start with sharing stories. What's your perspective? How did this conflict come about? What are you fighting over and what's important to you? And then I ask the other side to basically summarize back what they've heard so people feel like they can be listened to. But I realized that was not going to work here because as soon as the ex-wife started to talk, she started spinning and she was a victim. I went into victim mode and was blaming John and for everything. And John was getting really upset. And it just became very clear that wasn't going to work. And I'd studied a lot of neuroscience, even though nobody knew what neuroscience was in those days. I'd been studying a lot of neuroscience since 1998. And for whatever reason, the information all got synthesized in that crisis moment. And I told Susan, just all I want you to do is listen to John's emotions and tell us what he's feeling. And she said, what? And so we started the process. And at first she struggled with it, but then in a few minutes she got it. And all of a sudden when she got it, she became empowered. The victim attitude went away. She was now empowered. And John completely calmed down. And he said, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And they just went back and forth like that. And when John finished telling his story and Susan told her story, and that's when the magic happened. And
so then you had him do the same thing for her.
Absolutely.
I just want you to tell me what she's feeling right now.
Not what happened. So now I've discovered this thing. I've never seen it before. I've never heard of it before. In all of my studies, which was broad in my master's degree program, nobody had ever talked about anything like this. And I did research and I couldn't find anything out there on this. Well, 2 years later, 2007, Matthew Lieberman and his lab at UCLA, he's a neuroscientist, social psychology neuroscientist, studies the social brain, published the seminal study that shows what happens in the brain when you use this technique called affect labeling, the idea of listening to and reflecting emotions. And basically what his study showed was that when I tell you what you're feeling, as counterintuitive and counternormative as this sounds, literally the emotional side of your brain is inhibited. It quiets down. The activity reduces. And at the same time, the activity in the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the executive function of your brain, activates. And you calm down in less than 90 seconds. And it happens in every single human brain. It doesn't matter what culture you're in, doesn't matter where you are. All human brains are hardwired to react to this kind of statement. And so now I had the science. Now I'm a teacher and a professor. And so I started teaching it. I was called to a lot of conferences and I was using it in my own practice to great effect. And the lawyers started seeing that I could calm their clients down. And so they started giving me all the really tough cases, which is great.
Sure.
Then what happened was in 2010, my dear friend and colleague, Cofer, and I started the Prison of Peace Project. And we were invited into the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California, to train 15 women serving life and long-term sentences to become peacemakers and mediators to stop the violence.
How did that come about? They heard about you and they asked you to come in?
It started in August of 2009. Laurel received a letter from a woman by the name of Susan Russo, who had sent out 50 letters to mediators around the state to see if somebody would be willing to come into the prison and train these women how to be mediators and peacemakers because they were tired of the violence. They're living there all their lives. And, they didn't want the violence. They wanted quiet. So Laurel got the last letter, as it turns out. And she called me that August and read the letter to me and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think we should do this." So it took 6 months for us to get, one, to verify that this was a real deal, and two, get permission from the prison to try a pilot program. So we started in April, and the results were phenomenal. Absolutely unbelievable. In those days, we did the whole thing in 12 weeks. Today, it's a year-long program. It's spread out a lot more. But we had like 300 women on a waiting list within 4 weeks of starting the program. The word spread like wildfire, what we were teaching. And we were there for 3 years. And in fact, we got an unsolicited letter from the warden telling us that the prison had really quieted down because of Prison of Peace. And so then it repurposed to a men's prison. We went back and we taught the men. And this is all pro bono. We're not getting paid a dime for this. And finally, in 2016-17, the state finally recognized what we're doing, wanted to expand it to other prisons, and started giving us grants. So today we're in 15 California prisons. We're in the Connecticut prison system. We've got a colleague in 14 prisons in Greece. We've got colleagues that are starting up in northern Italy and in Nairobi. We're going to do a pilot project in Denmark, in the women's prison in Denmark. And the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, no more in-person programming, obviously. But we took all of the grant money we had and got permission. We hired a Hollywood film crew and we filmed our entire curriculum. So now we're able to offer the Prison of Peace curriculum to anybody in the world. And they don't need to hire us to come and train. They can just use training. And what's really cool about the curriculum is that we used inmates that we trained in prison who had been released on parole, and they were our best trainers. And they were all many of them lived in Southern California, and we used them to do a lot of the teaching. So when you're watching this, you're watching men and women who have served very long sentences in prison, who've been released, now teaching people who are going to be watching this video, which for the most part will be incarcerated populations. And so it has a huge degree of credibility.
Yes, I was going to say the credibility there is amazing when you can say you've taken this violence and taught people peacemaking skills in a way that they can embrace and get excited about. And it makes such a significant difference for an entire community and an entire population. It's very, very, very powerful. So obviously in our 40 minutes that we have here, you're not going to be able to teach us a year-long program, but I'd love to hear about some of the key points that you have, or just some of the basis. How does this really happen?
So it's a 3-step process. Anybody can do it. It does take some practice. It takes a little courage in the beginning because it is so counterintuitive to everything we think we know about listening. But what I've learned over the years of teaching this, not only in prisons, but outside of prisons, I've even gone to the Congressional Budget Office and taught senior analysts how to de-escalate members of Congress, is that as you practice these skills, you build your own emotional intelligence. Your own emotional intelligence just grows naturally by doing this. So it's a very powerful self-help development tool.
From the last time we talked, I started practicing this a little bit with my children. And I already really make an effort to have an emotionally intelligent family. That's my, I think, number one goal as a parent. And I've really worked hard on that. So this is not entirely new concepts, but I started to do this in a little bit different way. And I remember my daughter, I was looking at my door over here, was laying outside my door, kicking and screaming, throwing a complete meltdown. And I calmed myself down first. And then I finally opened the door and I said, do you need help calming down? Are you feeling really angry right now? And she just took a deep breath and she went, yes. I said, you feel really lonely and not listened to? And she's like, yes. And then it was over. It was literally over that one moment. Now, that was a miracle moment. That was the best it's worked since then, because we still need practice and they started to catch on a little bit. But I'm also noticing, like you just said, that I'm doing a little bit better at going, okay, I think I need a break right now. I'm feeling angry and I walk away, and it's really interesting. And so, I mean, not that you need my credibility, but I can say just in a couple of weeks and just from one little conversation that we had, seeing that change my own life. So I would love for you to.
So here's how you do it. It's a 3-step process, and it's going to sound really weird, but it works. It's hardwired. It absolutely works. Step number 1, you're confronted with an angry child, let's say, or an angry person. Doesn't matter. Anybody with intense emotions. Could be anger, grief, sadness. It could be anything. Could be happiness too. You ignore the words. You've got to learn to turn your ears off and not listen to what they're saying. And when your kid's yelling at you and saying, you're the worst parent ever. You just ignore all of that.
Just ignore that.
It's just noise. And there's no new news here. You've heard this a million times before, right? It's there. So you can afford to ignore the words because there's no important information that's being conveyed. And you ignore the words for 2 reasons. 1, to prevent yourself from getting triggered and reactive. And 2, to free up bandwidth in your brain to do the next 2 steps. So make those angry words white noise. Step number 2, you're going to read the emotions of this angry child or person. And so, well, how do you read the emotions? It turns out that our brains are hardwired to read other people's emotions effortlessly and accurately. I could go into I studied the evolutionary biology of listening and how we develop language. It's really quite phenomenal. We've only had language for 230,000 years. And that was only as a result of a change in diet. Once our predecessors mastered fire, they could render animal fat, which gave them a whole new calorie-based diet that completely changed the structure of our brains over 25,000 years. And things happened that allowed all the muscles and nerves that control our vocal structure to develop that previously had been undeveloped. For all those millions of years before, how did we communicate? We communicated through emotions, but without words. So our brains are hardwired to read other people's emotions, going back millions and millions of years. You just have to pay attention to it.
Yeah. So let's talk about since we talk about leadership here, I'm trying to think of a leadership situation. Like you're at work and your coworker comes in and they're throwing stuff around their, maybe they just explode emotionally with their words. So we're going to ignore their words, ignore anything that they say in that moment and hone in on exactly what they're feeling, the emotions.
You're going to just quiet your mind and let your subconscious do the work, which it will. And all of a sudden, emotions will start coming up into your head. And then you do the 3rd step, which is as those emotions bubble up, you reflect back to the speaker, to this emotional person, what they're feeling with a simple you statement. So I would say, Kyla, you're really angry. Oh, you're so pissed off. You don't feel appreciated. You feel insulted, disrespected, and you're completely ignored. And you're not getting any support. You feel completely unappreciated. And the whole process is just making you really anxious and concerned. And you feel a little embarrassed by it all. And you feel sad because the connection with the people around you just isn't there. And you feel completely abandoned and betrayed and unloved and like you're worthless. So what I did there, one of the tricks to this in the more advanced training is you've got to structure the data. So I have a way of structuring the emotional data so that once you learn how to structure the data, it becomes very easy to do what I just did. And you can learn it in literally half an hour of practice. And you just work through the layers. What presents first? Anger usually presents first. So you start with anger, but understand that with anger come about 6 or 7 other emotions that are underneath it. And so we don't just respond to the anger, we respond to everything else that's beneath it. And you never ask a question. Are you angry? Are you feeling angry right now? No, you never ask a question and you never use an I statement, that old active listening crap. You can just forget anything you ever learned about active listening. It's wrong. It's always been wrong. Never been right.
Oh man, I have a whole episode on that.
Yeah, no, it's wrong. It's just totally wrong. There's no science to support it, first of all. And second, it's based on a misapprehension of the work of Thomas Gordon, who was a 1950s psychologist. He was a student of Carl Rogers. And people just I did a lot of research into this and looking at the history because I was very interested. Why is this active listening stuff still being taught when it doesn't work? And I went back and figured it all out. I've got an article on my website. You're interested in reading about the history. But no I statements. You only use I statements when you talk about your own emotions. You use you statements when you're reflecting back somebody else's emotions. And you keep reflecting the emotions until you look for 4 things. 1, a nodding of the head up and down. 2, a verbal response like, yeah, are exactly, you want to look for a dropping of the shoulders and a sigh of relief, involuntary relaxation.
Which is really interesting because I think I did all those things when you were saying when you had your whole list that you went through, and I wasn't even coming in here angry.
Right.
Like this wasn't even about me. It was not my conversation.
Right.
It was something that you just made up. But somehow you saying all those things like made me go, yeah, okay. And I don't even feel those moments. I don't know where that came from, but
that's exactly right. And everybody has that same experience. Even when you're not escalated, if I just reflect back common emotional experiences, all that conflict that you've had in the past and all that stuff, you just release it because, oh man, he really gets me. He really understands me. And I call this emotional validation. I actually call it listening other people into existence. And here's the thing.
Listening other people into existence.
Listening people into existence. And here's what I've learned is that right around 6 years old, we stop feeling emotionally safe. Even the most loving parents, if they're not schooled in these techniques, are really quite abusive to their children. They emotionally invalidate their children, which is the most insidious and pervasive form of abuse that exists. So what do I mean by emotional invalidation? Think of something like you've got a child and she's running around outside and she falls down and scrapes her knee and she's 2 or 3 years old and she starts to cry, starts to wail. What do parents typically tell her?
I don't know about typical parents.
Stop crying. It's not that big a deal. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Don't be a drama queen. Put on your big girl panties.
Do people say that to their kids? Because I don't think I've ever done that. Oh, that's terrible.
Absolutely. And that's called emotional invalidation.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. Since you've listened this far, it tells me you're really enjoying the content. And I'm so, so grateful. I work really hard to bring you some awesome resources to help really enhance your leadership game. If you're liking this, can you pause really quickly? Make sure you're subscribed, but then also share with one person or more people who you think could really benefit from the content. My goal is to really bring this into some of the top podcasts on leadership in the world, and you can help get there and help us grow by sharing this with everyone you know. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're enjoying the episode. And maybe sometimes we don't mean to say things, that just comes out, but still, regardless, it's still invalidating that person's experience.
That's right. And asking questions is emotionally invalidating, and going to problem solving before you de-escalate is emotionally invalidating. And we do all of these things to soothe our own anxiety over the emotional experience that somebody else is having. Because if we're not emotionally trained, then we're going to naturally have anxiety over somebody else's emotion because we're not going to know what they're going to do next. And so it's anxiety producing. And so our subconscious immediately tries to stop the other person's emotions so that I can feel better about myself. And there are all kinds of studies that show how deadly emotional invalidation is. So basically what happens is when you're at about 6 years old, when you start to develop a little bit of agency and you're starting to take care of yourself and starting kindergarten and going to school, and you're no longer the sweet little 3-year-old that everybody doted on, all of a sudden you start to realize the world is an emotionally unsafe place. And if you're living in a family where emotions are not to be tolerated, or you can only have happy emotions, you can't have negative emotions, which is true for many, many families. Or maybe you live in a family where anger is the dominant emotion. A lot of my students inside prison had that problem. You shut down and you grow physically, but you never develop beyond a 6-year-old as a child. And what happens when you affect label an adult, many, many adults have this problem, is that for the first time in their lives, they feel like they have been deeply heard and understood at an emotional level. They feel emotionally safe. And as a result, they relax and they calm down and you can work with them. Now, let's talk about just for a second, how does it all apply in leadership? Well, you can do this to work one-on-one, obviously. But more importantly, as you develop this skill yourself, you become more empathic. This is a form of what's known as cognitive empathy. And you develop this skill of cognitive empathy. You walk into a room and you can read the room immediately. You know exactly what the emotional flavor is in the room. And you can actually affect label a team or a group. You guys are all feeling angry. You're all frustrated. You're all really pissed off. And you're anxious and concerned. And you can label the whole group just as effectively as with an individual. And when you can learn to affect label, you know what to say, how to say it, and when to say it, no matter how intense the situation. There is nothing that a person can do to throw you off your center because you've seen the behavior before. It's all same old, and you know exactly how to respond to it. And so that gives you great confidence in dealing with difficult conversations in high conflict situations or in group meetings. You've got somebody that acts out and speaks, there's always somebody who's a jerk. Perfect. All you do is affect label them and they shut right up. It's probably the most powerful leadership skill there is.
Yeah, because when you're bringing a whole group of people together with you, you're dealing with not just one person's emotions, but the emotions on the room. And
That's
like you
right.
just said, you've got the history with it. It's not just the emotion for that particular event or their job. They've got the emotions of what's going on at home. They've got the emotions of what went on at home for the last 25 years. It depends on what age that person is and whether or not they've been to therapy,
That's right.
or they've had these things listened to. They are bringing all that. We're always whole people. We're not coming with just part of ourselves to our work. We're coming with all of
That's
this.
exactly right. And here's the other thing that becomes critical. And that is that as human beings, we're not rational beings. We are 98% emotional and only 2% rational. This whole idea going all the way back to the Greeks that what separates us from other species is rationality is wrong. It's just wrong. There's no science to support it. All the science today
But we put so much of our effort and energy into that. Like we value rationality.
That's right. And that's why we have so many problems. The moment you start seeing people as emotional beings, not rational beings, then you see them in their natural state and you naturally generate compassion for them. As long as you hold on to this myth of rationality, you think, oh, we should all be rational, Spockian, Mr. Spock creatures, which we're not, then we set ourselves up for failure. But the moment we start seeing ourselves as emotional beings with just little tiny moments of rationality, what the economists now call bounded rationality, we can only be rational within a very narrow set of guardrails. Outside of that, all bets are off. But once you get this insight that we're 98% emotional, what point you were making just a moment ago is that the whole person has got to come to work. And what organizations mistakenly do is they tell people, check your emotional baggage at the door. I don't want your emotional baggage in here. All I want is your thinking and your hard work. But think about all the things that an organization wants and a leader wants in a follower. You want creativity. You want engagement. You want people to be happy. You want people to find meaning. You want them to be loyal. You want them to be willing to work hard when it's necessary and relax when they can't. And you want people to be trustworthy. None of that is rational. It's all emotional. Every single one of those words is an emotional condition. So we're asking our employees to be in a certain emotional state. At the same time, we're telling them to leave their emotions at the door. It's beyond stupid. And leaders are not trained in this stuff, so they don't know. You're not going to find anybody in business school teaching what I'm talking about. And that's part of the reason why we have so many problems in the workplace and why leading can be so difficult.
So the question that is not leaving my mind right now is, how does boundaries play a part in this? Because I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm also thinking, if I'm the leader and I'm the only one who's trained in this, it sounds like I'm going to be doing a lot of work with other people's emotions, which I'm wondering like how this can, it might just take one conversation. Yeah, I can call out that person's emotion. But if I'm doing that every single meeting, every single time, that could get exhausting, I think. And so I'm just wondering like how that works together, because mostly because I do think about boundaries, and I'm thinking, my own personal experiences, and I'm thinking through my own need to like help people that I've learned to overcome a little bit, but our struggles with things like that. How can we bring this training to the other people so we're not the only one responsible? And how do we make sure we're not being responsible for that other person's emotions? We're allowing that person to have their emotions on their own.
So what I teach is discernment. You learn when is it appropriate to reflect back emotions and when is it not? And to what degree or to what level are you going to reflect back emotions? And that just comes with practice and experience and coaching.
Okay.
And what my clients have discovered is that they don't, if they have a person who is constantly emotional, let me state it this way. When they start affect labeling and start listening to their people's emotions, everything quiets down and the mood and everything turns positive almost instantly. And the conflicts go away, the fights and arguments go away. It all goes away. If you have somebody who's persistent and chronic at this, that's a problem child. And you've got to decide, is this person in the right place, doing the right job, in the right position? Do we need to do something else with this person? And people that do not respond to affect labeling over the long term, in other words, they're chronically emotional, they probably have a deeper problem that they need to get help on. And no amount of affect labeling at work is going to help them. They need to get some deep therapeutic work. And that's when you would do an intervention and say, hey, you need to go get some help.
Awesome. I'm really glad we said this, because I think it could be really easy as a leader to see like, there's a lot of talk right now about ownership, being extreme ownership, really being the responsible one, owning your team and taking responsibility for that. But I think that we also need to accept that sometimes that, I can be the person to bring the emotions to the table, but it's not always going to It's not going to fix everything.
No.
It's not like a cure all. Like, we're going to have one conversation in this one meeting. I'm going to say, you're really angry. And then everything's roses from then on.
This is a lifelong endeavor. And the other point I want to make is the more you affect label other people, the stronger you get inside yourself. The more resilient you become, the more emotionally intelligent you become, the more emotionally self-aware you become, the more you're able to regulate your own emotions. It just, you continue to grow yourself. So even if you didn't want to do it for any other reason other than self-development, that's a good reason to do affect labeling. The biggest problem is that if you're the only person in your family, in your community, in your workplace that affects labels, there are times when you need to be listened to, and there's nobody there to listen to you.
Yes.
And that's all that requires is get people to learn. And the easiest way to do that is get a copy of my book and hand it. Here, read this book.
Tell us the name of your book.
Deescalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. My fourth book, published in 2017 by Simon & Schuster, and available everywhere. Actually, I've got put up a website for the audience. Let me pitch that for a second. So if people go to dougnoll.co/leadership-school, dougnoll.co/leadership-school, free ebook describing everything that I've just talked about, how to do it, why to do it, how I developed it. You can link to my book on Amazon. You can also buy a video course, my online video course, Deescalate. So it's a video course that I've created on how do you actually do these skills. And then for those who are really interested in going deeper, I've got 2 courses on developing emotional competency. And the basis of developing emotional competency is learning how to affect label. So those are all on that page. And then from that page, of course, you can go into the rest of my website, which is quite rich with resources and blog articles and videos and stuff like that.
Yeah, it certainly is. And we'll have that link in the show notes for you too. It's extremely generous. Thank you so much, Doug. I'm really excited to be able to offer that to our listeners because I think this is extremely valuable and can really change not just our leadership, but it changes us as people. And that's why I really think that to be a positive, effective leader, that you have to do your personal development work. You have to do it. And this, what you're saying is it can affect your whole life. It affects every little piece of it. It filters in all the spaces. It's affects your family, your relationships, your work, and can make a huge impact. And the more we continue to do that, other people continue to do that, and it fans out and makes a big difference in the way culture happens.
That's right. And the beauty of it does not take long to master. It's not hard to learn. It doesn't take years of therapy. Most of my clients and students can pick this up in 4 to 6 weeks with practice. Wow. And their lives change forever. Imagine eliminating all fights and arguments in your family forever. I mean, never having another fight or argument again. You take a 3-year-old or 4-year-old and you calm them instantly. I've had parents report to me that they started affect labeling their 2-year-old, and in 4 months, tantrums were gone forever. And the kids start picking,
my eyes just got big.
The kids start picking it up, and then the parents will start watching the kids affect labeling each other. They're learning how to calm each other down, and they just pick it up by modeling.
And so then when you're learning this as a young adult, or as a child or a young adult, how does that change the way that you learn, the way that you see the world, the way that you show up for other things?
It's profound. The studies are showing, again, out of Lieberman's lab, the studies are showing that when you start affect labeling a young child, say 2 or 3 or 4 years old, by the time they're 10, 11, and 12, they're almost always 2 grade levels ahead of their peers. Because what we don't realize is the emotional centers of the brain have to mature in order for us to be good thinkers. Emotions and decision-making and critical thinking are all deeply intertwined. And if you neglect your emotional mastery, you can never be your decision-making is going to be impaired as well. So when you affect label and you become an emotional coach as a parent, and you're coaching your kids when they're having these emotions, you just coach them by reflecting back what they're experiencing. They learn how to develop emotional mastery. Their brains develop much faster. They learn faster. They're more sociable. They're more mature. And academically, they're way, way ahead of their peers in families that don't do this.
And you mentioned it a little bit earlier, too, about how it would affect at work. Because if you were training your team on this, I'm just thinking about how well you would work together and how well you'd be able to approach problems and how much further you could go and faster because you'd essentially be on the same page all the time. Like you could work problems out as they came.
It's even deeper than that. Google did a massive study a couple of years ago trying to understand why only 1% of its teams in this huge company were super performers and the other teams were just average or subpar. And it came down to one factor: psychological safety. And the way you're going to create psychological safety is through affect labeling. And when team members feel like they're safe, it's safe to make mistakes. It's safe to state an opinion that's an outlier. It's safe You're not going to get ridiculed. You're not going to get put down. You're not going to be invalidated. And if there is upset, people are going to be listening and supporting you emotionally. The team performs exceptionally well. And that was the one thing that Google learned in this study. And they couldn't figure out how do we duplicate psychological safety. Well, it comes down to leadership, wow. Which is another argument for why organizations should be investing a lot more in leadership development than they do right now. Most organizations don't invest in leadership development at all, which I think is a big mistake.
I feel like we could just talk for a really, really long time on this because you have a whole course on it. You said you originally started as a 12-week program and then went to a year. Now, is this like every week for a year? Is this once a month? Like you're teaching all of these different elements. So tell me what that looks like. And you teach this as a class at Pepperdine.
You're talking a prison piece now. If you're talking about what I teach in my private practice, it's the same, but it's different. But in prison piece, what we do is we break it up into basically 4-hour chunks. And we have 4 workshops. And we space the workshops out so that a couple of months between each workshop to allow time for integration and practice. So in the first workshop, we're teaching them the 4 levels of reflective listening, which includes, of course, affect labeling. And we teach them how to be circle keepers, how to do a listening peace circle. So they're learning some leadership skills. And they're practicing the skills they learned in the listening workshop. And then in the next workshop, Peacemaker 1, they learn how to make durable agreements, how to get people to do what they promise they're going to do. How can you increase the probability that somebody's going to do what they say they're going to do? And then how to give advice without giving advice. How to help people solve a problem without giving advice. And then in the next workshop, Peacemaker 2, we teach them how to manage strong emotions, how to uncover their emotional triggers, because as a mediator, you got to stay really cool and calm, how to deal with negative self-talk, and how to morally engage a morally disengaged person, which in prison is a kind of an important skill to have. When they get through all of those workshops, then they're eligible to take the mediation workshop. And in the mediation workshop, we teach them what's known as an interest-based mediation process. So that as a mediator, they can learn how to convene, bring people who are in conflict together, get them to agree to mediate, and then walk them through a process. If they follow the process, they'll almost always get a resolution. Wow,
it's really incredible work.
And typically now it's done over a year. We're rolling out the curriculum now that has been digitized, and we're going to experiment with different formats and see which ones work the best. Is it a year? Is it 6 months? Is it 4 months? We don't know. We're going to have to play with it.
Wow, that's really incredible work. Thank you so much for sharing that, Doug. Hey, I want to ask you the 2 questions that I ask every guest, even though we kind of talk about them already, but it's fun to hear different answers. And what's interesting to me is as I've been doing this over this whole year, asking these same questions, they're often quite similar answers, yet they always have their just a little personal twist to them a little bit. So the first one is, what does integrity mean to you?
Integrity basically means you do what you say you're going to do. You walk your talk. So if you are claimed to be an honest person, then you act honestly in every instance, even to your own detriment. So integrity is simply being integrated, values and actions. It's a hard one for people to get because so many people are not willing to be accountable for their actions. And they like to claim that they have high integrity, but they really don't.
And we like to think that we're accountable sometimes. But then when someone comes to us, like me, there are definitely some times when I've thought, and especially like in a committed relationship, I'm in a marriage, and sometimes my husband will come up to me and say something, and I'm like, well, I really didn't want to hear that, or we think that we want to hear reflections back, but sometimes we really don't. Well, the next question is balance. What does it mean to be balanced, or what does it look like to have a balanced life?
This goes back to Tai Chi. It's not so much that you're balanced as it is that you're like a willow tree. You can bend with the wind, but never break. And you'll always come back to center, and you'll never get pushed off center. So you're always moving. It's dynamic. So you're moving around your center point, and people may push you or circumstances may push you, but you never break and you never fall. You always come back to center.
So what does that look like practically for you as a person? Because I'm hearing that you are a professor, you have a private business. You told me earlier before we got on this call that you have 10 acres, that you are also doing I don't know if it's a nonprofit or you have this grant with Prisons of Peace. And
well, yeah, it's a nonprofit and we get grants for it. So I have many, many different projects that I'm doing.
And how are you managing all of those and maintaining your own well-being?
Well, smartly. I'm well organized, and not everything that I do demands all of my attention all of the time. So I love what I do. I love all the different things that I do. And I think here's another secret I learned that may be of use. And that is, if you want a happy, fulfilling life, stop chasing things and start building meaning in your life. And the way that you build meaning in your life is to serve others. Now, this doesn't mean you have to do a Prison of Peace or a Mother Teresa thing or anything like that. All you have to do is figure out a way to serve another person in some way that's meaningful to them. And you know what's really cool is that when you learn how to listen to another person into existence, when you learn how to affect label, you can simply label a perfect stranger and they'll light up and they will be grateful because you validated them in a way they've never been validated before. And you just give them a gift of peace and you just serve somebody. And if all you did was label strangers' emotions once or twice a day, go into Starbucks, hey, you look really happy today, or the checkout person at the supermarket, or the server in the restaurant, and just label the emotions. And they all of a sudden they look up and say, whoa, somebody just paid attention to me. I feel good about it. It's just like you felt earlier in our conversation. I feel good about myself. You just do that. That's enough to create meaning, to serve others. And your life will become so full and so joyous and so full of gratitude that you won't believe it. And all that external stuff, no longer important. Big car, big house, lots of money, not important. It all goes away. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing how that works.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Doug. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we heard? We know how to find your website. We know how to find you and your name of your book. All that stuff is going to be in our show note. But is there anything else that you think would be really helpful for our listeners today?
This is a skill like riding a bike, and you've got to learn it. It's not something you can intuit yourself. You've got to learn it from me or one of my trainers, and then you got to practice it. It doesn't take long to learn. 4 to 6 weeks, 8 weeks maybe. I've only had one student. It took her a year to really get comfortable with it, but she got it. And it's one out of hundreds of thousands. So you can learn this quickly. And I will guarantee, and I do guarantee in all my courses, that this will change your life in such profound and unexpectedly beautiful ways that you won't believe it when you do it. And the only way you can discover that is by trying it yourself. I can talk to you all I want, but until you go out and actually do it, you will not have the experience.
Yeah. Awesome. Doug, I don't have anything else to say. I'm just sitting here thinking and processing. And what's fun is all of this is not new to me because of the work that I've done. None of it's new, but it feels new. And I don't know why. So I'm really excited about this. And I'm looking forward to continuing to put some of these in a practice in my own life in a different way. And I think it's extremely valuable. And I'm very excited and grateful to you for being here on the Leadership School with me and just sharing all this wisdom and expertise that you have. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this journey to grow in our leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, you've got to check out the leadership and self-care coaching programs on my website at kylacofer.com. Let's change the world together.